everyone. It is wonderful to be back on the University of Minnesota campus. I was just thrilled to be driving into a place where I spent some of the best years of my life and the best day of my life, which was the day that I received my PhD. Oh wait, the day I got my Judd Fellowship. But I really and truly am thrilled to be back here and to see all of you who came before me and who have come up the ranks behind me, and really pleased for the invitation to share some of the experiences that I got while I was a Judd Fellow in Geneva and those that have happened afterwards. Surprisingly, many of them still in Geneva, but don't worry, I have also traveled many other places besides Geneva. I wanted to just share the stories that have come because I wanted to do this as a way of saying thank you. Thank you for the donors and the network that gave me the support that I needed to start my career. Literally, I think that's really what this was about for me. My background is I grew up on a small farm in Mississippi, and my parents were organic farmers. And I was through a long series of very strange events in a boarding school, a Seventh-day Adventist boarding school in rural Mississippi, and watching a video on the Human Genome Project when I was a sophomore in high school. And I was thinking, that is the most interesting thing I have ever seen. They are going to sequence the genome of a human being. That is amazing. I want to do this with my life. And by the way, I want to be out of Mississippi, and I think my ticket out is to go and be proficient in science and technology and strive for these kinds of opportunities to happen. So I did that. I went and worked in a fruit fly lab. And unfortunately, that quickly put a damper on my enthusiasm for science, which was sad. I thought, okay, well, anyway, I'll go on with life. I've got bills to pay and things to do. So I moved to Minnesota. I have family here. Left Mississippi, left the South, came up here, and was working in finance and looking for things to do. That was Wells Fargo Bank, at that, Norwest Bank at that time. Looking for things to do in the evening. So I stumbled upon the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, which is this little nonprofit here in Minneapolis that works on exactly what it says, agriculture and trade policy. And I started going to evening events, and they were talking about genetically modified organisms and agriculture. And I thought, wait, I'm a farmer, I know about genetics, I know about genetic engineering, but what I really have never heard about is all this controversy around engineering plants to be better at doing various things or be resistant to pests. And this sounds fascinating. Science is back, and now all these other things are coming along with the package of science. I'm going to quit my finance job and go back to school. So I went to the Humphrey Institute, where I then worked on a dissertation on agriculture and trade policy, looking at the dispute between the World Trade Organization and a number of countries over GMOs, and why so many countries were very upset about the importation of GMOs. Now, the epicenter of a lot of this was the World Trade Organization in Geneva, so I figured I better get myself there to see what was happening on the ground. And that is where the Judd Fellowship gave me that seed funding to get over there. It was literally my first trip overseas. And I lived in a Jesuit dormitory, and I spent 3 months in Geneva. And at the end of that summer, what I realized was very important. I didn't want to work for an NGO or a civil society organization. What I had heard was a total mind changer for me in terms of how we think about science and how it is used in international discourse, and the way that scientific evidence or claims about science can drive trade wars and economic growth and policy and social disruption. And so much of this was about risk. And I said, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get a PhD in risk assessment. I need to understand how we talk about risk. Societal risk, economic risk, environmental risk. It's all wrapped up in this GMO thing. And it just takes me into this trajectory. Went back to school, got the PhD, and was very explicit. I didn't want to be in research. I told that to my committee the first day. So when I got done with the PhD, which I had done in South Africa, looking at the impacts of GMOs on biodiversity, I tried to figure out a way to get into international policy. That is when I looked into a fellowship that took me to the U.S. Department of State. So I moved to Washington, D.C., and I began working for our foreign ministry, essentially. And I lucked into the office that handled the UN bodies that deal with biotechnology. and the regulation of GMOs. And as a science policy fellow at the State Department, they started training me to be a negotiator in the United Nations. And so I started going to all of these UN convention meetings and sitting on the microphone for the United States government and talking about the need to keep science open and fair and respectable, and for biotechnology in particular to be something that is really available and can bring economies and communities into great benefits. And I was bringing also the expertise in things like synthetic biology and gene editing. These issues were really starting to pop on the international scale. That was great. That took me then into another job with the science advisor to the Secretary of State, John Kerry. So I was in that office and they widened my portfolio out from environment to robotics, AI, blockchain, everything under the sun. And our job was to advise our senior leadership. What could happen when these technologies start to blossom around the world? What kind of disruptions will happen in economies, in diplomatic relationships? My job was to go do a lot of things, but go back into the United Nations and negotiate agreements that keep science and its role in development and economic growth open and moving forward. I walked back into the United Nations in Geneva after having done my Judd Fellowship in Geneva and thought, whoa, okay, this is pretty weird. And at one particular instance in that, I went to Geneva a lot, but I remember one negotiation, I was sitting there, me on the mic, and it was Iran, and Cuba, and Russia, and the United States. And I'm on the microphone for 3 days, negotiating the role of women in science, language on the role of women in science. Those countries wanted to take that language out of this agreement. And it was my job to not let that happen. And so we spent 3 days fighting, back and forth, comma here, take that out, move this over here, put this in, trade that off, da-da-da-da. And then finally at one point, I just stopped and I said to the room, I said, it is not lost on me that we are sitting here and you are trying to eliminate the references to women in science, and I am a woman in science. Anyway, we got through that, but that was sort of a crystallization of Judd Fellowship Geneva, back to the State Department, take it to Geneva again. And then the election happened. And I got a call on January 30th, 2017. It said, tomorrow's your last day. I know you have a great science advisory appointment, but things are changing in Washington, D.C. You gotta go. So I was recruited by the World Economic Forum to join their new campus in San Francisco, which is the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And it is devoted to shaping the trajectory of emerging technologies as they move through society and economy. Now, the World Economic Forum, you probably know, if you know anything about it, it's an international organization. It hosts Davos, so the big convening up in the Alps. And I didn't know they were working on policy, pilot projects, and shaping the trajectory of emerging technologies, but it was perfect. It was another place where I could go to bring together stakeholders, think about these huge societal issues on a global scale, and particularly for my job, to actually bring together coalitions around projects that look at norms, standards, best practices, regulations. How do you develop the infrastructure and the policies and processes that aim to accelerate how these technologies move through society, but also to minimize their risks? That was what I was hired to do in the healthcare space. So we have 9 project areas and all the different emerging technologies. I'm in charge now of precision medicine, which is a way of diagnosing and treating disease that takes into account an individual's genes, their environment they live in, and the behaviors they're in. This is a way of sort of a revolutionary, it's a bit of a sea change happening in some of the healthcare spaces. My job is to figure out what are the policies that can accelerate that change to getting better at diagnosing and treating disease. And to co-create these big pilot projects around the world to help do this with all these countries that want to get better at this. So I show back up in Geneva for my first week. Although I'm based in California. The mothership is in Geneva. And I thought, I'm standing on the lake and thinking, here we are again. Back in Geneva. And I will tell you just one final story on what has transpired in this job, which I started in July of 2017. I did go to Davos. That is often the first question everyone asks me. Have you been to Davos? Yes, I've been to Davos. I work Davos, so it's not that much fun. If you're working behind the scenes to pull these things off, massive effort. We had over 70 heads of state at Davos last year, Donald Trump included. So I am in a little glass room with about 25 people in the main mezzanine in the big conference center, and I am trying to facilitate a discussion between the CEO of Intermountain Health Systems in Utah and Tolu Oni, who is a young scientist from the University of Cape Town, about how do we work on precision medicine in the developing countries or developing economies. And all of a sudden I hear behind me just this huge ruckus, screaming, hollering, shouting, people just going crazy. Donald Trump is walking up the stairs right behind me, and everyone has lost it. They are literally trying to climb over the balconies, take pictures, and my two speakers trying to get through, like, why is precision medicine important to the world? They did it. God bless them. And to top it all off, Intermountain Health Systems actually became the key partner in one of my first pilot projects on how to share data for precision medicine across national borders. So we got something really good out of that session. But I'll just say, in closing, those are the kinds of experiences that I really and truly attribute to what happened with that first summer in 2005. And for that, I really, really want to give thanks to the community and to everyone who is currently a Judd Fellow and who is amazing. I've seen a lot of your posters and talked to some of you. Already amazing, but think about where it could go. Really, I think about where it could go. And also, for all of those in you in the audience who are alumni, you have to step up to the plate. Because it is our job to help make these experiences possible for others. So that means giving. And I want to inspire all of you to please expect something in the mail. No amount is too small. Believe me, I worked my way up, but started very, very small. And please feel yourself part of the community that makes these kinds of things happen. Thank you.